Greetings, adventurers, travelers, and fellow keepers of the lake. Welcome to the second episode of our podcast, Lakeforge. A forge that sips water from the lake of creative thinking, the sole lake that we guard, and spews works of art. These art bubbles surface to be picked by little mind goblins and brought to the vault beneath the keep, from which we beam them into our mundane reality to make it just a bit more beautiful. I'm here with my friend Lazar and a fellow TTRPG enthusiast. He's actually one of the players in our main game, The Code of Krampus. And yeah, if you want to hear more about who he is and what he does, listen to the first podcast episode, which is all over the place. We're gonna try and be a bit more coherent in this one. And the topic for today would be TTRPGs and art. I know it sounds very generic, but we have a lot of thoughts on the topic. So yeah, with that, I will give the word to my friend.
Yeah, we definitely don't want to hide our urge to say that, TTRPGs are really the art, the way that we see the art that moves us, the art that makes us, think about life and social interactions and dreams and all of that cool stuff that art should do. So I really wanted to just walk you through, some moments of basically the history of art, and I'm just gonna simplify it the way I see it. We really like the idea of using the communication model. So let's say it has three elements. It's a author, the text, and the audience. In our hobby, in TTRPGs, the author should be GM. We're gonna discuss about that definitely. But let's say GM is a author. The game that we create all together is the text, and the audience are the players. Yes, we talked about let's call it like the second stage audience, the one that could watch the stream of your game. But in this particular case, I would like to think of audience as the players, because it makes more sense in the concept that we're gonna talk about. So the first concept of art and the first impressions of those ancient artists we like to call bards nowadays was something they called mimesis back in the days. It's just their intention to imitate as realistically as they could the world around ourselves. So we would say the first forms of art are not mentioned in this model. They're not focusing on outer texts or audience. They were just focused on outer world, and the artist was trying to replicate that world in his form of art. And we would say, oh wow, you really have a nice story about what happened in our life, about Trojan War or stuff like that. And that was really good. You had people that we called bards, like Homer. They had really creative minds, and we still admire their work. And you had people who were called rhapsodes. Sometimes and I really want to mention them here, even though it might not have so much sense at the moment. And we had rhapsodes who actually had a lot of good skills, good artistic skills. They could sing or just play some instrument very nicely, and they would just reproduce things that bards would make, and people would admire those people. They would pay them for their work, for their art, and they still thought about it as an art, even though it was not really creative. Actually, it was
Basically cover bands.
basically. But really, really good cover bands. Okay, who doesn't enjoy cover bands? Even they are, we know they're.
I'm trying to have a cover band, so yeah.
And you're doing a really good work. Okay, but still, we really need to make this difference, because it makes sense. We're gonna talk about that later, I hope, if we come to this point. But I really feel like bards and rhapsodes are actually two different types, two models of DMing. And so we say that the first intention, or first human artistic intentions, were about being aware of outer world and being able to replicate it in some way. After that, we kind of figure out, just talking about world that we can all see, that we can all experience. I mean, you talk about it in a very nice manner, but it's still, like, I can say, that's something that only few people can do, because, when it all started, people weren't so skillful when it comes to art. But after some time, they learn those skills, and you would have a lot of skillful, people who can just really nicely imitate the world around us. And that just, stopped being very interesting thing for the audience. They wanted something more. So they met some artists that actually are trying to express their inner world, the things that were going on in their mind, in their heart. So that started becoming, very interesting, as an opposite to what they were used to hear and to read and to see. So artists would try to express their thoughts, their emotions mostly. And yes, we think about romanticism mostly. But it was a very important, part of the history of art, because we were finally focused on ourselves. And I would say, that's the moment when the focus of art was on outer. So if we think about TTRPG games, then we would say, that's the approach of actually a lot of GMs. They're trying to express their philosophy, maybe even, their beliefs, some, spiritual thoughts, generally, like the way they see the world. They don't like how world looks like, maybe, and they're trying to like give a different view of the world in their games. And that can be a very cathartic moment, for them, that they can feel good about them. Maybe players find it also very interesting world. Like they like the way he did his world building and everything. And that's definitely a thing. I mean, everything that we mentioned here is still a thing in modern art. You want to include all of these models, but we definitely evolved from just like trying to simulate real life through our art, to the moment where we are trying to express everything that's going on inside of us. And after that, like the audience just became like, I won't say like sick of it, but like they just heard enough of those expressions and they wanted something else. And then their main focus was the text itself. So in our case, that would definitely be the game, but that's a discussion for itself. Like, what can we say about the evolution of the game, of the mechanics and everything? That we just can't go into that, because we will never come to our point. But at some point, especially now, we have critics, right? And that part of the audience that seriously takes a lot of effort in trying to understand the art, what makes art a art. We have formalism, we have a structuralism, and people are just trying to define what is really valuable thing in the artwork. And that's when when focus shifted from the outer to the text, in our case the game. The next moment, and my favorite moment, I'm so happy that I live in this period of the human history. It's something we call postmodernism mostly, but there's a lot of different aspects like a reception theory, for example, that just focuses on the third element of this model, and that's the audience. In our case, of course, players. So at this point, people just get interested in themselves for the first time. Interesting how much it took for them, to be focused on themselves. But the artist is not the only person who's creating our worlds. That's the whole idea. They're just getting involved, and the artist, the authors of very popular, interesting, or valued postmodernistic novels, for example. I will mention some Serbian authors that I really like. For example, Milorad Pavic. He made a great book called A Dictionary of Hazard. On the first pages of the book, he will actually tell you that you can read that book in so many ways, and that you are co-creator, actually, because you are the one who chooses which way you want to go, because there's so many ways you can read the book. Before this, we also had that concept in our minds, because every time you read something, you see some beautiful painting, you have your own impressions, you have your own thoughts, and the things that are happening in your mind are actually your own creation. Even when you are not conscious of that, you're still a creator. But now we are like very aware of the fact that we are co-creators, and authors are trying to push us that way. They're not allowing us just to be passive audience who just reads what is already written. They require from us to get involved. I think that's the moment that TTRPG is obviously becoming a new form of art. And we should also mention that these ideas started happening and becoming popular around mid of 20th century, and not long time ago we seen the first TTRPG systems. And I think that it's just hard to take that as a coincidence.
Oh my god, that was an explanation. Fucking wonderful. Amazing. I had to take some notes, so I will go through that if you're okay with that. I hope I didn't cut you off or anything.
No.
So, just to clarify, and you can hear about this in our first podcast, we don't necessarily think that GM is the author and that the players are the audience when we express our own opinions, but to put it in some form of structure for this discussion, we are gonna go with that. And yeah, you mentioned that rhapsods and bards are kind of like two schools of DMing. I would say that it is hard, like with anything that is black and white, it is very hard to put DMs into one of those categories, because we plagiarize the hell out of everything. I mean,
It's called intertextuality, by the way.
Oh, yes,
Okay?
yes. Okay. There is a term for that. We're doing intertextuality and not plagiarism, so keep that in mind. I mean, I get it. I'm just joking. I get it, because some of the books that I've read and that I would try to integrate into my prep material is maybe something that some of my players would never read themselves, and it's a shame for them not to experience those aha moments, those feelings, and just the vibe, the relation between characters. Sometimes that inspiration is also interpreted to the prism of my own DMing and the world that we've built so far. It evolves into something else, but still keeps that core that would maybe even get some of the players interested into reading that book. And then we come to that part where people started focusing on their own ideas and preferences. And I think I like this very cool quote from Matt Colville from MCDM. I don't know if it's his quote originally, but it says, if you have strong opinions, homebrew. If you don't have strong opinions, don't homebrew. Basically, he gives an example of Tolkien, who had a strong opinion on how you write elves. So he did some homebrew, basically. And I think that feeling that you can introduce things. You said spiritual thoughts. I did have some spiritual thoughts at one point, and I think the religion in my game is very much inspired by that. I'm sure we will talk about that at some point, maybe in this podcast, but we'll see. Absolutely, that's a very cathartic feeling when you see that something that you've created gets the treatment like some other works of art. And for me, that moment was when I had for the first time, when I had two games running in the same world, in the same timeline, in very close proximity to each other in the game world. And we go and get some beer at the bar, and those two groups meet. And I'm just sitting on the side and listening to them go on, like, theories and ideas and just things they saw, things they noticed in the world, almost like I've seen those people have these conversations around video games, around movies, books, every other media. So for me, this was a very cathartic moment. And then you said we come to this part of history when we are focusing more on the text. And I think part of that has still remained in the TTRPG space, because we do have critics, as you said, critics that have their full careers critiquing other art forms. And then we ask the question, is critiquing an art form an art form? And I would say that yes. I know a lot of people that play video games know about zero punctuation, now called fully emblematic. And yeah, Yahtzee is a master of words and packing those words into a small video that is cynical but yet humorous. And it takes some art to create something like that. We wouldn't be coming back to it if it's just rage bait. I mean, people come back to rage bait, but that's just the manipulation of the internal reward system, basically. So we're not gonna go into that. But yeah, I think we are seeing more and more channels on YouTube that are strictly dedicated to reviewing TTRPGs, which I think is a form of critique, because you go into mechanics and you go into book structure and art that's in the book as well. So you are critiquing everything from game design that is very applicable to video games and other board games and stuff, all the way to poetry, where you have books that have inserts in between chapters that are poetic in a way. Crown and Skull has a short story that is continuing in between chapters. So this is something that we don't see that often. I'm trying to say different types of artistic expression are bleeding into these books, and we have people that are strictly dedicating their time to reviewing as many as they can, try to figure out how the mechanics will make people feel, how the art and the book itself as a book, not as a game, hold next to some other works of art. And then you mentioned the dictionary, the Serbian, how would you say that in
Dictionary of
English?
the Khazars.
Khazars dictionary, right?
Is the
So for the Serbian audience, Khazarski rečnik, right?
Yep.
And yeah, I think something similar that people in this hobby much longer than we are alive had some interaction with, and I think even before, like computers and video games, were adventure books. I have a couple, but while I was young, like there were no adventure books in our region, not that I know of. When we were young, it was a very bad economic situation in Serbia. So even if there were things like this before, they were surely considered very rare in that period. So we didn't have predominantly any interaction with those. But adventure books are very interesting because those are the books that you have like decisions as a reader you can make in the book, and it tells you to which page you can flip, and then the adventure continues. It's like having a GM in a book. It's a very interesting concept, and you can do a lot of things with that. Some extreme examples of that is, I think, Vsauce, also a YouTube channel dedicated to science and like interesting facts and learning, showed on one of the shorts is there is a book where you have two players, so you and me take the book, And I start from the beginning, you start from the end. You pick a move, I pick a move, and every page is an illustration of like a hallway, and we are trying to meet each other and shoot each other. You can win or lose depending on your decisions. So I think like it's an extreme way to look at a book. It's more of a game, but it still falls into the category of adventure books, I would say. And that's, I think that goes very well with your point. And now we come to the point where each person is a co-creator. Authors are trying to push us this way. And I think you gave me a good example of this. Now, we discussed how we would say this in English, but I will just try to say it like objective correlation, maybe. That sounds about right. I don't know. So where you cannot, as an author, express sadness or grief directly in the book. You cannot imprint it as like with a stamp in the book. You need to use other ways to paint the picture that will make us feel that. The way that I feel sadness might be different from how you feel sadness. So we have different experiences of this art form, and that is the whole intention. Maybe some words are on purpose written in a certain way that a person who maybe has some prior knowledge of some other works will have a different understanding of the book than someone else. And now I'm thinking, is there a thing called subjective correlation? If there's objective, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. Like maybe in TTRPGs, phenomenon like that could happen, because then you in other forms of art you don't. We talked about that actually a lot. We haven't mentioned it yet, but actually, while you play TTRPG, you definitely give an instant feedback to a person we would see as a author. So that might be a subjection or correlation, because then other players and the GM himself would have to interpret your feedback, your reaction on objective correlation. But yeah, objective correlation is just it's a term brought by Eliot, and he really like that idea, that concept of his is actually really helpful, because we forget that no matter what we do, even when you are trying to explain to your friend how you felt, sometimes you come to conclusion, you just can't understand me. It's just that problem that you cannot completely copy your feelings and just paste it to the paper or any other type. Yeah. Yeah, maybe
The brain chips are gonna
yeah,
fix that.
yeah.
I'm gonna transfer you my sadness over Bluetooth or something.
I would really, like to see that moment of our future.
Why?
I'm living up to that.
That's
I mean, I
horrible.
want my dreams, to be able, I want to be able to visualize my dreams to other people, and just give
Okay,
them
for
that piece
dreams,
of shit
but
instead of,
not-
trying to describe all of that to my psychotherapist. But I'm just trying to say, like, we have all these ideas and are gonna talk about these ideas, because I think just understanding these concepts can really help you a lot in TTRPG, no matter if you are like a player or a GM, or if you are any kind of creator or creative mind. If you just want to express your feelings, just think of it the other way. It's not about what I feel and then I'm trying to say what I feel. It's about like what I say in order to make other person feel what I feel. So that's actually that's not the point where the focus of art is on the audience. It's actually the moment where the focus of art is on the text. And I still think those moments of evolution of art or evolution of the theory of literature is actually are the most valuable ones if you are trying to improve your skills as a GM. Ideas coming from these minds, this era would definitely be the most helpful ones. But we're gonna keep those ideas for the next podcast, because we cannot just talk about all of that now and still make our point. But I just wanted to come back, like we made a little and really rough and minimalistic walkthrough through the history of art, but we forget the first moment. I kind of, I can say I recently figured that out, and it was a one very special moment for me, that actually the first forms of art, right before the humans learned the way how to write down their stories, their thoughts. It was a type of art that was varying all the time. It was changing, and usually it was changing because of the feedback of the audience, the reaction of the audience. So one very talented bard would say a story, and then the audience would react this way or the other way, and he would consider their reaction, let's say their feedback, and he would try to change the parts of the story that didn't really get the reaction he wanted to, or he would emphasize or like boost those moments that would really like made audience happy, or react in a positive way. So the first forms of art were actually more alike to what our hobby is, TTRPG. So I would say TTRPGs actually just brought what was new there is just the mechanic that kind of regulates the way, directs the way in which story can go, and in directs the way that story can be made. For example, like nowadays you have mechanics, right? You cannot just say like this happened. You have to roll a dice and then see if that thing really can happen. I mean, intention is still there. We cannot forget about that, but you just can't, completely make story by your own. Even though if you are very like strict GM, there's still, of course, space for your audience, players, to interact with the narrative. And if we come back to those ancient moments, a bard would make a story and he would change it, and the story that we know today might be changed for like thousands of time, and even the form that we know today, that the text that we read wasn't the final one. Probably for that bard, he continued shifting the elements of the story, but at some point it was written like that, and that's the only way we've seen it. In TTRPGs, the story never really ends. I mean, yes, you definitely finish your campaign, but the world is still there, and nobody can restrict you to come back to it and then try to change things, or just try to add something to the world.
Now, that is an interesting topic for itself. When a campaign ends, and if you have a TPK, God forbid, or you have player characters that have retired, like, is that the end of the story? Do you still consider the world that is living in our minds, and the fact that we're remembering and asking the question, well, what is happening in that world now? Like, you're sitting in your chair at your computer and you're like writing a business email, and you start thinking, what are those goblins doing right now after we saved their goblin princess, even though your character might not be even alive anymore? So that's the question. Where is the end of the story, that the art form in that sense?
I would say the end is always in our minds, and we can always put point to it, we can end it, but usually the good stories never end. If we just come back to Iliad and Odyssey, by Homer, it's the same world. The other story happened just after the Trojan War, and it has a completely different characters. Even a lot of different artistic approaches, different motives. So I would say, if you create a nice world, even though you never continue playing anything in that world, it still exists somewhere in your minds, and you are always free to play with it, even if it's just, inside of your head.
Now, this came to my mind. Even if you're not writing it down, especially if you're not writing it down or creating an animated series about your campaign, as you're retelling this, we're back to that original form. If you're telling it to your friends, you're telling it to your children, maybe tomorrow, maybe those stories will then be passed to the next generation, and they will change as our memory is not perfect. Even some moments, like I've been recording some of our sessions when I started DMing, so I remember what I've said to each player and what I promised. So when I remember those moments, they are so much different than when I listened to the session again. I mean, well, we're not gonna talk about how much slower it happens in real time when you're listening to it, but even some details and some descriptions that have completely changed in my mind by talking to the players about that world 50 sessions later, like it's an ever-changing snapshot. I would say it's a rolling snapshot of our experience. And yes, that sounds like something that relates to that original form of transferring art from one person to the other. In my village, I come from a very strange, my family partially comes from a very strange village on the top of a mountain on the border with Bulgaria. And we had some interesting songs, like short songs, that are also considered spells in a way. And these spells, you can ask 5 different people about the spell, and some elements are still the same, but a lot of that has changed just by like people misremembering basically, or adding some flair, and that that motivation to add a bit more to it, make it more fun. That is why we prep. I mean, prep as world building is one thing, but prepping for your game and like the events that are gonna happen right now is a totally different thing. And prepping the events and the response of the world is always done one session in advance. So you're constantly adjusting those knobs for satisfaction and like narrative impact while you're playing. So it wouldn't be the same if you told me everything that you're gonna do. We decided, like hypothetical scenario, this is not how people play, but if we decided on all outcomes before the game and we just did them, would that be like if we did our best to make it as fun as possible for the audience? Let's say the audience is some other third party experiencing it. Would we do it at the same level of quality and engagement like we would if we didn't know what's going to happen next week? Honestly, I don't know the answer to this question, but sounds interesting because I think it is something tied to the energy around the table, tied to the excitement and the emotional reaction. Like you can imagine a character reacting emotionally to a situation, but that emotional reaction, when you imagine it as a writer, is one thing. But when you do something to the character and that player has an emotional outburst, a reaction in character, of course, that is completely like outside anything that that player could think of if you gave just the text and said, write what your character would do in this situation. I don't know if you're...
No, I definitely understand what you're trying to say, and I was thinking about it, and I didn't like the idea, and then I came to another idea that actually, there's some form of art that you kind of mentioned it before. Like some authors like to put the deeper meaning in some words that a lot of readers, audience wouldn't recognize. So in that, if that's very common his artwork, then it's becoming elitistic. It's just for a certain group of people, and most of regular people, they just won't understand all of it. And this it's a different kind of elitism in TTRPGs, because a lot of people would understand what you are doing. I mean, they would understand the game and what's happening on the table. But if they see it, I mean, if you just know that somebody is watching you, and that this is a thing that's just gonna stay on the internet for the eternity. I think, I mean, I'm talking from my perspective of view. I just think that I wouldn't probably play the same. And if I wouldn't play the same just for because of the fact that somebody else who is not the part of the group is watching me, then it changes the game, and I don't like that change. And I know a lot of people, I mean, we are all aware of that, are succeeding in this, that they're really making a lot of great content for all of us, and we kind of even try to learn how to play the game from how they played. And we talked about, I just don't want to go into it, because that also brings another problem, that we are trying to find the right way to play, which I don't think it exists. There's no right way. It's just the way that maybe fits your group better, or maybe the way that fits our artistic creative intentions better. But all in all, I don't like the idea of somebody watching our game if it changes the outcomes or our decisions. And I think even if it's just a very, very small influence, it's still affecting our game. And I think that probably players, after some experience with that kind of streaming, they would probably after a while become comfortable with it, and that might not affect the game. I still think that people looking, watching your game on the screen, trying to understand everything, that there's a lot of game actually happening outside of the game, right? We talk about what happened in the game. We then come to some ideas that we might not share with other players, but they just started growing in our mind. Inception happened, and
It's all because of snacks and alcohol.
yeah, most of the time, but not always. And I still think those things are happening, and you cannot see that on the screen. And if we just think about TTRPG as a form of art, and the way you can see that art, I enjoy that art. You are not able to truly feel it unless you become a participant. And sometimes I would even say that it is very important in this art that you at least once experience the playing of the game, because if you experienced it once, or a couple of times, then you can definitely see the things that are happening on the screen very differently.
In a different light completely. And I think it very much depends on if you click with your DM, with the first DM that runs for you. But I agree with everything you've said to a point. I think running and playing D&D on streaming platforms is an art form of itself. And like I would even try doing it. I think the reactions that are changed still bring another layer of, imagine your internet persona role playing. It's almost like you're doing double role playing, but one is inherent and one is on purpose. So I think there is something interesting there. But I mean, the only reason why we don't do live plays on this channel is because we play in Serbian mostly. I just tried playing in English once with Rich from Renegade Rolls, and yeah, it was very fun. But for me, for our game, I think our language is what we enjoy more. But I didn't maybe phrase my question well. The thought experiment goes like this. Imagine you have an adventure. 4 heroes go and save the Goblin Queen from the orcs, whatever. And imagine that every time there is a decision that the characters can make, we predefine it. So 4 of us sit in a room, 5 of us actually with the DM, and we want to write the story on a piece of paper. And we predefine every outcome, and I ask you, what is going to be your reaction? And you say, oh, my character would react like this. And then some bad things happen to your character, and you say, oh, he will react angry. And you describe that anger in some way, and whatever, you get what I'm aiming at. You end up with a text that is the whole adventure that we played and how everything turned out and what were the reactions of characters. And let's say we have infinite time to make it as good as possible. My question is, would that be of better quality than if we played for 5 weeks? Each time you have a genuine reaction at the table that is driven by your emotion. And if we finish that adventure and also write it on a piece of paper, would the one we predefined be more fun to read than the one with genuine emotional reactions to it? I'm not talking about the style of writing or the quality of writing itself. I'm just saying that those emotions and like outbursts that you didn't plan, it's a question. I think maybe if we all knew ourselves so good that we knew exactly what reaction we're gonna have, those two would be the same. But we don't know what our reaction will be. We don't know how we would interact if orc bites off your arm or something. At the table, you would be like, "Whoa, I just lost an arm," and you would genuinely be like contemplating how you're gonna wield your two-handed weapon after that, and that would be fun. Maybe someone else would feel that energy. Maybe you stand up, and then others stand up, and then there's more energy in the room, and then the DM starts to like drift and take some risks. And I think that energy in the room, I mean, it sounds so cliche when I say it like that, but the emotion is something that we can't predict. So in that way, I think, I mean, this is just my opinion, I think that all of us sitting down and writing the exact same story on a piece of paper just without playing, and that exact same story with same dice rolls, same numbers, but playing it week by week, preparing as GM week by week, I think the one we are playing would be more fun to read.
For some reason, when we play and when things happen just in front of us, especially, I haven't talked about this, but definitely like those improv moments of yours and any other GMs, they, for some reason, I mean, I definitely don't have at this moment very good arguments about it. I maybe didn't really think so well about this phenomenon, but for me, those moments that are the result of improvisation and of the actual state of your mind are for some reason more convincing, if that makes any sense. But for somehow I would say like, oh, no, this is the real deal. If I give you 5 minutes to like 1 minute to think about it and then just write down it the way you feel is like better way, the more perfect way. I would think that it is, some kind of fraud. Not a huge fraud. I'm okay with that kind of fraud, but it is a fraud. It didn't happen in the actual moment. That is not your real reaction. And in literature, for example, quite opposite thing happens. So as an artist, you can feel this way, and you can definitely try to put that down on the paper, and a lot of artists did, and it went, really well. It can definitely work for some people. They would call it inspiration, right? They had an inspiration, they immediately put it on the paper. Maybe, they try to, refine those words in some manner, and that's all of the post processing they did. But that's different approach. Some people would take art as a, kind of a mathematical problem. They would think about it. They would, try to change, the elements of the story to include this and that, to avoid saying some things, or to add some elements that they would never think about in the actual time. And that makes it also, interesting and can add value. But I don't see there's space for, that kind of creativity in TTRPGs, because the things that are happening at the moment, I mean, those elements are actually part of the, simulation that we like. We talked about simulation and we didn't define it very well, but when it comes to, real simulation, the part of the way that TTRPGs actually imitate. I mean, it's a rough word. I know it's a rough word for that, but like the way that TTRPGs imitate life, in my opinion, the best example of that is, those moments that, just happen. They happen for some reason, because maybe, that player that day he was angry, and that definitely, like, his state of mind affects the character. But it's okay. We want to see that too. As a character, he, still have to motivate, to give a reason to his acts. And if he does it the right way, it doesn't matter if the result was actually affected, with something that happened to him like 10 minutes before he started playing the game.
Very interesting. I didn't even think of it that way, but yes, that answers my question in a way, because we can't, even with infinite time. Well, when we say infinite time, that is like lab conditions. I think even with a lot of time on our hands, we couldn't predict all the factors that go into your reaction, and that. I mean, now we're. This is an interesting question. Are emotions deterministic?
What do you mean by that?
So first, to say what deterministic is. For exact starting conditions, you will get the same output. So the same result. So for example, I write a piece of code. It should always follow some rules and give me the same answer if the input parameters are the same. So addition is, in my opinion, deterministic. When you add 2 and 3, you will always get 5. So there's this theory that says, like, it's almost impossible for us humans, and with technology we have so far, to predict some things. True randomness, okay? True randomness is non-deterministic. You will always get a different number regardless. And we in programming try to simulate this by using time as our one of the inputs, quote unquote, and that makes it seem undeterministic, but actually there is no true randomness on the computer, because computer cannot be non-deterministic in that way. It's programmed, it's made by us, it has certain architecture, it will have certain behaviors. And if all the starting conditions are the same, you will get the same output. For example, how you set those starting conditions when you're talking about randomness in a computer, there is something that's called a seed number. The seed number goes into this strange algorithm and it spews out a random number. Every time you use the same seed, it will give you the same number. But we use time as the seed, so we get different numbers through time. But that doesn't mean that if you take the time in the past, you won't get the same number that you got in the past when that time was used. So What I'm trying to say is, for example, there is this theory, chaos theory, that says that with very slight variations in starting conditions, you will get wildly different results. And the best example is the pendulum experiment, the demonstration where you have pendulums that have two, like they have an elbow and then they're all connected at the same point, and you just set them a little bit away. Like the starting positions are very slightly different, and the outcome is like they completely go into different directions. At some point, they start very similar, and then very fast they go out of sync. So my question is human emotion something that is deterministic? And I know this question poses a bigger question of free will, and I don't think we can discuss if free will exists. This would be a very big jump in like philosophical ideas. But if you have a person that started, we will have to limit it at some starting point. So we can't say if you have a person that lived the exact same life and had the exact same brain as me, would that person react the same way as I did? Because yes, that is probably true. I don't know, but probably. Let's say you have two different universes, and in both you wake up and all the same things happen to you. Would you react to them in the same way in both universes? If nothing is different, everything is completely the same, would you react the same in both universes? Because that means that emotions are deterministic in a way. I'm probably explaining this in a very broken way. I see a couple of edge cases in what I've said so far, but let's ask that question. With unlimited time, could we predict how you would react if we take into all of the factors around your life? I think that's possible, but very hard. So in my hypothetical thought experiment, it would be possible for us to write the exact same story on both pieces of paper, but it would take us not time, but a lot of knowledge of how we would react. And I think that knowledge surpasses the amount of knowledge that any human being can have. I mean, I've gone crazy
no,
here,
no,
but
that's okay. Really,
I'm just brainstorming on the spot.
While you were talking, I came to a little bit, different idea, and it's more of a question to your question. But I started thinking like we consider a mechanics, rolling a dice to be something that brings the randomness,
Yes,
variables
and
into the game, and that's what we like about it, right?
And that is true randomness. In my thought experiment, I removed the dice as a factor because I said all the rolls are predefined.
Oh, but I don't really. I mean, it definitely is randomness, but it is kind of like a regulated randomness. It goes by some rules. I mean, it can go from 1 to 20. Okay,
yes, but that doesn't make it deterministic. It's still you can never predict when the dice will fall.
A variable, okay, and that's what we like about it. But when you think about it, like let's say that there were actually some experiments of this kind, and I used to kind of be part of this experiment. They like to teach you this exercise where some members of the group start the story, and then you add one or a few sentences to it, and then you give the story to another member, and he adds a little bit of his work to it, and that's the way story continues. I can really see games we play to be a type of this exercise, right? If they didn't have the mechanics, and the exercise of this kind that I experienced, they actually bring a lot of randomness. Of course, I mean, we are trying the point of the exercise is you are trying to match the style, to match the main emotion, feeling of the story, and of course you're trying to finish the story. That's the biggest task. But in these exercises, actually we figured out it, even if we are all talented writers, creators, which we were not, it actually is a product or a lot of randomness. Every time I get that paper and I have to put some words on it, I'm affected, with words that are put on the paper before mine, and I have to think about that, and that every time when those words interact with my mind, I put something completely random on the paper. And just let's try to imagine that happening in the game. For example, you say the world looks like this, and we're in the room that looks like this and has this and this, and you see that person and that person. And what do you do? And if I say I do this and this without rolling dice, and the other person says that, and then after that I have to, make a new decision that maybe not does not fit my character, anymore, at least not in the way I want to. You can see how that can go a very different directions, because that's actually a different question, of our freedom. So for example, I have my freedom bubble around me, but if I'm trying to be completely free, my freedom bubble will actually, bump into somebody else's freedom bubble. If just, imagine a sphere around the person that we're gonna call freedom. So definitely, what I'm trying to say, if we don't have some rules, even though we think those rules in our games bring randomness, it also bring a kind of chaotic order, if
I
that
see.
makes any
I see.
sense.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense because we're all subject to the same rules. That's how you classify if a decision and if an action will succeed or not. The way we're going to manifest that story afterwards is something that you say is, I mean, also governed by the rules of the world you're playing in and governed by the dice. You are all directed in a way. You cannot experience true randomness that goes like, oh, there's a spaceship now. One of the players says, and the GM is like, what spaceship? This is a fantasy game. We talked about this. Please stop involving spaceships in our fantasy games. There is there are some rules that govern this. So even with dice being random, they still are the ultimate decision makers. And that's very interesting. And on the topic of you mentioning that exercise, I think I had this idea of a similar exercise in TTRPGs for a while now, where I would like a campaign where you have a number of players and one GM, and that GM has 3 sessions to run in that world with those players, with all the NPCs, and then one of the players after that 3 sessions becomes the DM and runs for 3 sessions and can change anything about the world. All the secrets are revealed to that person. Now, that person makes new secrets, changes the world. It becomes so much more random, but I'm very interested to see where that would go. What would happen when the last person is GMing? That person will know the least secrets. They'll be completely clueless of what is happening. And imagine how unpredictable that would be. Like, I hate this NPC, just destroy him, erase him from the plot. Other people might be like not okay with that if they have like investments in that NPC, but we all kind of made sure that we're okay with anything that will happen. So this is one experiment that I would really like to run. I think that the best number here is to have 4 people involved. But yeah, maybe when we find some time, we should try this.
I
totally.
think we will try this, and we will make
First
a
I have
podcast
to-
just
Yeah,
about
yeah.
this little experiment.
First, I have to get the rest of the people into GMing.
GMing, yeah.
Yeah. Now we have me and my friend, and you are there on the border, right? You're preparing for your first GMing experience, and you said you want to try it by co-DMing. This is something that I've recorded the video today actually about. I don't think I gave it justice in the video because there's not much to say about it like, yeah, just try it. Here are some tips, but I'm not very satisfied with it. I think it's one of those things that you need to try and see with your group and feel, not something that I can like. It's not like I was doing a session recap so that I show where the person was involved. But yeah, I just want to get the worm into people's heads and just make them think about it, try it out. But yeah, I think for this event that is happening, January by Elder Goblin Games, um, I think it's one of the coolest ways to introduce someone to the hobby. And I'm certainly going to do that throughout December and January and then report on results. So we will see. You will be one of my guinea pigs for sure.
So we definitely have to come to some kind of conclusion. We definitely can see a TTRPGs as a form of art. I mean, we mentioned all the elements of art through the history, not like back in the days, like the art had like couple of elements. I mean, some existed but weren't so developed or not intentionally there. But in TTRPGs, we can like see a lot of them, even elements of a different arts. We talked about that too, and I want to mention that our intention here is not just to say that TTRPG is art, or to say it's in some ways is better than the art forms we know about. I just think like this comparison actually brings us to those specific things that our hobby has and that our hobby should be all about. And maybe it's just good to have these differences in mind, to remind yourself like what why do we do this, why do we enjoy this, and why do we come back to it.
Absolutely. Yes, I think for me personally, the ultimate form of art that I've found works for me is tabletop. Mostly because I'm all over the place. My mind needs a lot of fresh things. Today I will be crafting terrain. Tomorrow I will be writing music for a video. I will be filming. I will be writing prep for the game. I'm all over the place. And I know not everyone is like that. But just knowing the fact that as a player or as someone who is not ready to invest that much into the hobby, you can still be a creator. You can still let your passion come to life. You can still have your moment with your comrades around that janky terrain that we made out of bottles and like plates. That is very, very valuable. You feel like you've made something. You feel like the story was yours to tell, and you will be telling this story for times to come. And maybe, as we said, tell it to your children, maybe write a book about it. You will be inspired. And this feedback of playing itself is in a way making art, and then being inspired to turn that into another form of art. That is something that is very valuable to me. And the barrier to entry is so low compared to any other art form, especially because you have so much. I don't want to call it competition necessarily online when it comes to other art forms. You start playing guitar, you see a 6-year-old playing better than you. You start writing, and as I think you mentioned in the previous podcast, you read something where you're like, I don't think I will ever reach this this level. In TTRPGs, yes, there is the Mercer effect, but I think it is such a small thing to just say, I will never roleplay this well. Like, I don't even want to call it roleplay. I won't voice act this way. Okay, that one part you might not want to get proficient at, but everything else, the fact that you, with your conscious little mind, are contributing to the table, I don't think anyone else can replace that. As we said, we all come from not slightly different starting conditions, but from very, very different starting conditions. And our lives are so much different that in the end, you are the jewel, the unique one around the table. So every group becomes an author, every story becomes an art form. And I think that is, in a way, beautiful.
Lovely. May I just answer to one of your questions? I completely forget about it, and now it's becoming very, important question. Is the critique also the form of art? I honestly believe it is. I mean, I want to believe it is because this is a, you know, kind of a critic to TTRPGs in general. One great professor of mine liked to say that a good critic always you can see if the critic is good by just thinking like, is this critic motivating me to read that artwork again, or is it at least, if the artwork was bad and the critic was negative, is it moving me just to read something else that I think is good or even create? And if we manage to do this with our little talk here, I would say we really did something amazing.
Yes, so this podcast will now be produced by the Lakeforge and taken by the little goblins into the vault beneath the keep to be beamed into your ears. And I hope this is the start of something really cool. I really enjoyed this one, much more coherent than the last one, honestly. So, yes, for all those who want to continue following this podcast, we will be regulars. Don't think I will replace this man. This man is unreplaceable. So, if you want to hear more from us, consider subscribing. Yes, I hate saying that, but the YouTube statistics say when you say it once, people subscribe. When you say it twice, people subscribe more. But when you say it 3 times, people don't subscribe. So I'm just gonna... Oh, well, I blew my chance. I already said it like 3 times. Well, I think we can... Metafiction. Yes, that is metafiction. Okay, so I think we're gonna wrap up for today. It's getting late. And it was a long day, so thank you everyone who stayed up until the end, and I hope you have a great day. Hope to see you in the land of dreams, but until then I bid you
farewell, keepers.